All critics want to convince you that they're right. But what better way to do that than to argue that they're objectively correct? Not just correct or that they have the right opinion, but that their opinion is objective.
Anyone is welcome to generate an objective opinion based solely on the measurable elements of the content, or they can generate a personal, subjective opinion based on how they felt. But they are completely different conversations.
Objective criticism is when someone tries to remove their own emotional biases from criticism, to analyze the functionality of a narrative, cinematography, acting, etc., to determine if a film works. Now, on paper, that does sound reasonable. I will say straight away that objectivity is typically a good tool when trying to examine the functionality of media. However, the problem is a lot of critics who say they're objective use objectivity as a crutch. They analyze media in a way where they can argue that the film is objectively good or bad.
Mauler's infamous assertion that The Last Jedi is an objectively bad film was a declaration that launched 1,000 ships.
This may shock you, but Star Wars The Last Jedi is objectively bad content. It is provable. This is factual. You may enjoy the film, and even love the film, that's absolutely fine, but it is a poorly written film that stands as an objective insult to intelligence.
Now, mind you, these are subjective terms, good and bad. If good and bad are opinions, then how can we objectively reach the conclusion that something is good or bad? If saying something is worse than something else is, again, an opinion, how can we objectively say something is the worst film in a series? The problem is people conflate an objective conclusion with irrefutable proof. And also, sometimes people who review media objectively are doing it either very poorly or using tangential evidence to make broad, sweeping declarations. All of these are cases where objectivity doesn't really help all that much. You can say you're objective all you want, but the moment that you either fail to use objective reasoning correctly or your objectivity is clearly subjective opinion, it undermines your entire stance. And yet, critics constantly call themselves objective. They remove their biases when reviewing media in order to give you the truth, whatever that might mean. This style was popularized by reviewers like EFAP and MauLer, who believe that by going through a movie scene by scene, second by second, frame by frame, they could analyze the shortcomings of any narrative. I kind of see that like examining a painting made into pointillism style with a magnifying glass. Sure, you get a good look at how each dot looks next to each other, but you get a poor idea of how the big picture looks when you back away and see how those thousands of individual dots you are judging look together. You may miss the individual flaws of each dot, maybe one's misaligned or one's slightly misshapen, but from the further big picture perspective, the dots come together to create a perfect whole, seemingly. Despite the small mistakes and imperfections, the whole still works. And then other critics would copy Mauler's style to worse effects, but we'll get there gradually. Trust me, we have a lot to get through with this video. And here's the thing, unlike a lot of Mauler's other critics, I think there is a nugget of truth to what he's saying. While I'm ultimately negative on Mauler's critical style, I'm not going to pretend that there isn't some reason to it, some logic, nor am I going to pretend that nothing Mauler says can sometimes touch upon authentic criticism. But I have a few objections, naturally, otherwise I wouldn't make a video about this topic. Mainly because, well, even if you call your criticism objective, that doesn't necessarily make your statement compelling or convincing. Keep in mind, and this is something I'm going to come back to, just because something is objective does not mean it's correct. Compelling arguments are based on the idea that you can convince someone else of your opinion and perspective. That's it right there. Even by divorcing your subjective opinion from your evidence collection, this does not necessarily make your argument convincing. It's also important to bring up my personal biases from the start. Last year, EFAP and MauLer did respond to one of my videos on their stream and tore it apart. As of this writing, their stream has 194,000 views on their main 7-hour stream, and just short of 50,000 on their highlights. It's their 4th most widely watched stream on their channel in the last year, And yet my original still has more than twice the views, so I can't be too mad about it. In fact, I kind of appreciate the free publicity they gave to the video. I do think their feedback was beneficial in some ways. Some of their criticisms did help my style moving forward. I also think a lot of it was a complete waste of time. I genuinely think Mauler's style of criticism is extremely repetitive by its nature, and I will be addressing this in the video to follow in more specific detail. However, I do intend on being unbiased as a result of this. Unless absolutely relevant, I will be avoiding mentioning my initial video in this discussion. It will be mentioned, but only where I feel it was necessary to assist in augmenting my core arguments. Mauler is in many ways the poster child for objective criticism on YouTube, with many people citing him as a key inspiration on how to effectively, objectively criticize film. But the problem is, many critics have already criticized Mauler, pushing against his idea that you can objectively judge a film. And in response to this, Mauler isolated a section of another video in order to devote to criticizing these critics. I would say this is the same thing I did with my original video, except the key difference is here, he has a lot of receipts of tons of people criticizing him in this, whereas at the time, I had very few of those.
Now, in relation to those who find my channel frustrating, there is an ongoing conversation about objectivity versus subjectivity. I have been made an example of by a handful of people as the channel who thinks his opinions are facts.
Or to put it like he likes to, his opinions are objective. And the opinions of people who disagree with him, well, those are just subjective.
Isn't it so strange that people can't seem to get a quote from my videos that would even remotely resemble that statement?
Look, Mauler, I don't know how to tell you this, but lines like this kind of sound like that to the average person.
This may shock you, but Star Wars The Last Jedi is objectively bad content. It is provable. This is factual.
I know it's not literally what you're saying, but it sounds close enough.
I know it seems impossible to watch movies wrong, but you're watching movies wrong.
Oh dear, that seems contradictive, doesn't it?
And I'm not coming here to tell you that you're wrong.
6 months later.
You're watching movies wrong. You're kinda watching movies wrong.
This is what I end up hearing from the same people who believe they have more authority to speak on the subject of film analysis than others.
While this video is about 6 years old, it does offer a blueprint as to Mauler's perspectives on objective criticism versus the subjective criticism of his peers. In the video, he criticizes video essayists on how they parade their opinion as fact, or how to convince you without using objectivity in their stances. And to go over what this means in its entirety, let's go through the segment of the video discussing other critics, their critical analysis, and how Mauler feels his technique differs from their own.
And all those plot holes people complain about, they don't actually matter. The actual problems are that many of the central characters are totally static and poorly motivated, and the one major moment of growth is caused by a ridiculous plot contrivance.
So, plot holes in favor of payoffs don't matter, but plot contrivances in favor of payoffs do? Patrick, you realize that a plot hole is a plot contrivance, but worse, right? At least with a contrivance, it could happen. A plot hole, by definition, is a strict contradiction. It should not happen. You seem to be contradicting yourself quite a lot.
Mauler's video starts with a criticism of Patrick Willems for being incorrect about plot holes. Specifically, Willems compares plot contrivances to plot holes, saying that most people who watch movies complain more about contrivances than holes necessarily. Mauler says a contrivance and a plot hole are basically the same thing, except a plot hole is possibly worse. Let's analyze that for a second. As defined by Merriam-Webster, a contrivance is an artificial arrangement or development. In regards to the plot of a film, that's anything that feels fake in a narrative, anything that draws attention to the artificiality of the storytelling. Now, in this sense, all plot holes are contrivances, but not all contrivances are plot holes. Let me elaborate here more. An example would be if in the final act of a film, the main characters found a superweapon conveniently just lying on the floor. There's no build-up, there's no foreshadowing, it just materializes when the plot needs it. This is a contrivance. On the other hand, a plot hole would be if the standard weapon they've used the whole movie suddenly gains a massive boost in power for no explainable reason. It doesn't make any sense, it contradicts what comes before, it is a hole in the logic of a narrative. You would criticize both differently. A plot hole and a plot contrivance both will deflate the tension of a scene and remove any sense of concrete reality you're watching. It takes you out of the movie and forces you to question what you're seeing. The end result is ultimately the same. So, is Mauler right here? Is it fair for Willems to make this statement? Is Mauler objectively the one in the right in this argument? Well, here's the problem. Only one of these feels contradictory to the elements previously presented. So, yeah, the inconsistency of a plot hole is a problem, but ultimately speaking, both do have the same end result for the audience. In both cases, the viewer is taken out of the moment if it draws attention to itself. The problem is, how seriously does the contrivance or plot hole take the viewer out of the moment? And does it really impact the core point of a given scene? That's something that depends on the movie, on the scene, on everything. The problem is both Mauler and Willems are being pedantic about nomenclature. The problems between a contrivance and a plot hole are pretty narrow, and it's very particular. The real issue is that these instances take the audiences out of the films. It deconstructs the reality constructed unintentionally by the creator, and it impedes the idea that they're trying to immerse you in an experience. It takes you out of immersion, and therefore it is wrong. Whether it's a plot hole or a plot contrivance is particular, sure, but it's ultimately secondary to the impact it has on the audience. Also, Mauler, I need to question your logic here for a second, because you point out that Patrick Willems is inconsistent, right? But you see, you seem to think that Willems saying film critics being paid off won't impact general trends in audiences is inconsistent with how Willems will personally look at the reviews of critics that he trusts in order to gain insight to see if he wants to see a film.
These people write scripts with more inconsistencies than the films I am trying to criticize, and these videos that they make are only 10 minutes long.
Critics are not bought or bribed. Disney does not pay off critics to trash DC movies. It's not like bad reviews hurt Suicide Squad's box office, so why would studios waste money on that?
A few moments later.
Before seeing a movie, I'll skim reactions from critics I trust on Twitter, or glance briefly at the reviews, and if enough of them seem to dig it, I'll see the movie. Why would studios waste money on that?
How do you write that in the same video?
You act like it's a contradiction, but it really isn't, Mauler. Patrick Willems is not indicative of the average moviegoer experience. After all, he knows critics by name. That already makes him not an average moviegoer. Most people can't name critics. Even Roger Ebert, someone obvious like that. So the average person is already different from Patrick Willems in this sense. But also, him discussing his personal feelings is not contradictory to the general trends of audiences. Objectively, Mauler's stance here is incorrect. Mauler, I wouldn't even care about these small details, by the way, but you make such a big deal when anyone else slips up, and you act so confident about this. Like, this is a big deal, but it doesn't make any sense logically. It sounds like you think you totally got Patrick Willems here, but you really didn't? It's more your tone that makes it sound like you got him, but when you look at the words you're saying, it doesn't make much sense. Now, I do have issues with Willems' video on plot holes. I don't think it's flawless. But these are ultimately arguments about the specific examples Willems uses rather than the core points that he makes. I feel like these examples do distract from the core of what Willems is saying, that we should watch movies more for the experience and less about the logic of individual scenes.
Movies aren't about logic. They're not equations. They're not proofs. They're not puzzles. Movies are not math. Remember that guy in your freshman dorm who would always try to guess the endings of movies so that he could prove that he was smarter than the people who made them? Well, now everyone is turning into that guy.
I agree with that core idea, but as time goes on, I do agree less and less with how he argues this point, and even in some cases, what the core argument he's making even is. In part because, actually, I do think that Batman getting into Gotham at the end of The Dark Knight is a massive plot hole.
The Dark Knight Rises, we never see how Batman gets back to Gotham City. That's a plot hole.
One of the earliest cinematic developments was the concept of montage. The idea is that when two images are presented in sequence, the audience understands that they occur chronologically and will mentally fill in the time between scenes. So for instance, if a person is in one location and the next scene they're in another location, we understand that in between scenes they traveled between the locations. Movies tend to assume that the audience is reasonably intelligent, but I guess they're wrong. If movies showed us every single second that happened during the span of the story, they would be 40 hours long and really f***ing boring.
That's not the problem people have with that scene, though. It's established that the bridge is guarded on all sides. No one can get in, no one can get out. The military can't even get in without detonating the whole city. If Batman took out one guard, it might trigger a chain reaction that results in the whole city being bombed. So how did Batman get in without being noticed? Well, even then, the other problem is that Batman was established as vulnerable the whole film. He's at his weakest at the start of the film. He's recovering from a serious injury. By having Batman just effortlessly break into Gotham, what ends up happening is it dilutes the tension surrounding Batman's vulnerability as a character, thus breaking the immersion of the scenes that follow and undermining the whole conflict built up throughout the whole film. But rather than get into that infuriating example that Mauler could easily get a home run on, instead he focuses on one quick example about xenomorph blood in the original Alien.
Patrick talks about how many critics are getting facts straight wrong by not paying attention to the movie, as if he is separate from that collective, only to then, in the same video, say this.
In Alien, if the acid can melt through the floor, why doesn't it melt through the entire ship?
Patrick, acid doesn't just burn forever. It will neutralize after it eats through enough material. In fact, that is the immediate concern for the crew of the Nostromo in the film Alien.
Thing's gonna eat through the goddamn hull, come on!
After realizing that it could potentially eat through the hull, they then find the spot where it's reaching its end and comment on it. Do you understand how many contradictions we've reached in just a few minutes?
This is the thing I gotta say. Yeah, Mauler is correct in this instance, and Willems is incorrect that it's a plot hole. However, the problem's a little more complicated than that. For one, Willems brings up the alien blood in a chapter focused on how certain plot holes have explanations in the plot.
I mean, how does Benicio del Toro know the rebels' plans? Nobody told him. That's a plot hole.
At least 50% of the plot holes that I see people complain about are things that are actually explained in the movie if you just pay attention. Like that one in The Last Jedi, there's a scene where you see DJ listening as Poe tells Finn and Rose the Resistance's plan. But I guess if you're too busy live tweeting about plot holes, you can miss some stuff. If you want, you can find plot holes anywhere. They're all over your favorite movies. In Lord of the Rings, the Eagles could have just flown the ring to Mount Doom and saved everyone all that trouble. In Toy Story, why does Buzz freeze like the other toys when he thinks he's a real person? In Ocean's 11, how did they get the flyers into the vault? In Cinderella, why does the glass slipper stay when everything else disappears? In Alien, if the acid can melt through the floor, why doesn't it melt through the entire ship? In Gremlins, what does after midnight technically mean? Isn't it always after midnight? How does that rule make any sense? In Star Wars, why does the Death Star have a trash compactor when they can just jettison the trash into space? Look, if you want to watch stuff this way, you can even find plot holes in this video.
One can infer based on the context that Willems might be implying this is an example of one such plot hole that has an explanation in the plot, but that this explanation is less important than your experience watching the film as a collective whole. As I mentioned before, I don't think there's really a one-size-fits-all answer here with how important individual plot contrivances are in the scheme of things. It really does depend on how much the moment breaks immersion for the audience. But here's the problem. Mauler kind of just proved Willems' point for him. All Mauler is doing is pointing out the inconsistencies without addressing the core argument of the video's chapter. That many so-called plot holes have explanations in the plot. I mean, Mauler just did that. He basically just proved Willems' core argument by nitpicking a specific example.
At least 50% of the plot holes that I see people complain about are things that are actually explained in the movie if you just pay attention.
Patrick talks about how many critics are getting facts straight wrong by not paying attention to the movie, as if he is separate from that collective, only to then, in the same video, say this.
In Alien, if the acid can melt through the floor, why doesn't it melt through the entire ship? Look, if you want to watch stuff this way, you can even find plot holes in this video.
Do you understand how many contradictions we've reached in just a few minutes?
Which is fascinating. The problem is Mauler has convinced his audience that this one throwaway example is the argument, that it is on its own a specific example of an inconsistency. The problem is Mauler's structure requires you to look away from a core point to make it. He nitpicks a specific example, a specific component of a moment, and hyperfocuses on this example. By doing so, he takes your attention away from what the filmmaker or essayist or what have you is trying to actually accomplish. By doing this, what he ultimately does is create a false argument. By disproving this false argument, he convinces his audience that he's correct, and he never actually has to address Willems' core, full argument in its entirety. This is a core tenet of Mauler's style. Create a substitute argument based on an example. Focus on that one example, and by the time he stops criticizing that example, you, the audience, have already forgotten what the person he was arguing against was actually saying. It creates a substitute argument in the mind of the audience that Mauler can then deconstruct and break down.
His video on plot holes was so poorly constructed that despite the positive ratings on the video itself, an overwhelming proportion of top comments are in disagreement with him.
Other arguments Mauler makes in this video, though, are less compelling than the Willems one. Take this, for example.
The fan base will always appreciate a good new video, but once you have time to discuss it, videos with awful argumentation start to fall apart. I would say that one of the most accurate examples of this clear disconnect would be Joseph Anderson's attempt at explaining why horror games don't scare him, and his follow-up video. His first video was very confusing in structure, conflating his feelings with facts while presenting that an entire genre is fundamentally broken. This served to reveal a sense of ignorance in the exploration of said genre, and I have honestly never seen such a major portion of the comments section in complete disagreement. Similarly to Patrick and HBomberguy, these were despite the positive ratings.
So I decided to watch Joseph Anderson's video, and I didn't find the argument particularly complex or difficult to follow. The core argument can be summed up simply as, because horror games have no consequence for dying, and in fact encourage you to retry levels again and again, death holds no real fear. There's no real consequence for the monsters and horror in the game, and it becomes more of a puzzle than a fearful experience.
Typically, a main character in a video game can't die. Sure, they can get ripped apart, impaled through the chest, blown up, all sorts of things, but they always come back. Sometimes it's contextualized within the game's world, sometimes it's a simple reload screen and you're good as new. Better actually, since you've learned something to avoid that same death next time. See, it's because of the interactive nature that this doesn't work. When a character is in danger in a movie or a book, there's already a set ending for them. They very well could die in the scene that you're watching, or face lasting repercussions for mistakes. There's tension because every injury and every death is canon, whereas a death in a game is a release in tension instead of cranking the pressure even higher. You hit a fail state and restart. Suddenly that monster that killed you isn't nearly as threatening anymore since you've just experienced the reincarnation superpower of your character that you always knew was there but may have blissfully ignored until now. Imagine this happening in a movie. Death ruins horror games.
He then argues that games that have permadeath in it are actually more intense and frightening than, say, your Silent Hills, where you can die again and again and again and just reload as if nothing happened. The argument isn't particularly complicated. In fact, Mauler also mentions that the comments were against him as well, but having looked at the top comments, the ones that got the most engagement were either positive or slight pushback on some points, but not really a full rejection of his ideas, as Mauler implies. I don't know if Mauler just didn't get the argument or demanded something more complicated, but the video is pretty simple. It's very straightforward, it's a very basic take, and it looks like Mauler is deliberately misrepresenting the comments, or, over time, the comments have become kinder to this video. It's unclear which. Though, if you asked Mauler, he'd probably say his opposition creates the straw man, not himself. That his opposition makes up and misconstrues things that he says, not the other way around.
Patrick and many others like him are so woefully beyond inconsistent that their only recourse is to invent quotes from their opposition in order to make them look more ridiculous by comparison. It's a hypocritical straw man, and it's not very effective. While this backward logic is splattered across different conversational threads, my channel has been generating more and more interest from people who enjoy the central premise. People who rather clearly understand what I'm actually doing here. So no worries, folks. I am fully aware of them trying to play the semantics game to discredit my work and the work of many other creators.
Not for nothing, but it looks like Joseph Anderson's video also profoundly ratioed Mauler's original video response to him.
These are the kind of videos you end up with when you have a severe lack of self-awareness.
But what matters is Mauler wants to say his arguments are based on objective reasoning, while conflating his opponent's reviews with opinions.
Speaking of which, Joseph responded to the criticism with an extremely condescending video explaining that it is in fact on the viewer to figure out which statements he makes are subjective and which are objective. This absolves him of any responsibility in his own writing, placing the blame directly on the viewers. As a result, the comment section ravaged him once again. These are the kind of videos you end up with when you have a severe lack of self-awareness.
Okay, let's work with that and examine the methods he uses to determine objectivity in a narrative.
Many people across all debate, discussion, and discourse from the dawn of time have put in a strong effort to blur the line between subjectivity and objectivity. If not by malice or ignorance, it is a backward way to win an argument. To redefine a landscape until your feelings are considered fact, with no regard for what the very definitions of those words even are. And with more and more controversial discussions taking place, you will eventually find the word opinion is thrown around far more than references to the topic being discussed. The purpose behind it, in this case, is to champion the idea that there is no such thing as good or bad content, that everyone is simply sharing their perspective. You know, the mentality that everyone gets a medal no matter what.
Mauler argues the reason why people want to avoid saying things are objectively good or bad is out of some perceived everyone does a good job mentality, which, no, that's not why. They don't believe things can be objectively good or bad. That's why they don't say it. It's not that they have some interior motivation, they just don't believe that's the case, because they perceive good or bad to be subjective arguments. And the thing is, Mauler knows this is the case, because he just said it 5 seconds prior.
Separating how they feel from the art itself is something they disagree with at the core, so of course they get upset when you point out a flaw they can't reconcile emotionally. But this is not a foreign concept for them. They are fully aware of the difference between objectivity and subjectivity, and they know when content is poorly made. It simply doesn't apply when it's their sacred cow. Thus, they end up taking criticism as a personal insult, but good lord, that is not the case.
But let's add a little bit of a lack of self-awareness there and hypocrisy, shall we?
Besides, it's much easier to simply smear people who disagree with you rather than open a discussion. Isn't that right, Quentin?
To state that your opinions, which mostly come down to things like thoughts about the lore and nitpicks about dialogue, are objective facts that can never be disputed by anyone is ridiculous.
Yeah, good going there, showing him what's for by smearing him right back after you claimed he smeared you. That's not hypocritical at all.
These are the kind of videos you end up with when you have a severe lack of self-awareness.
The point of a review is to argue your point, to convince the other side that you are correct. Rather than say something is objectively bad, they try to convince you that their opinion that something is bad is accurate. The thing is, though, with that structure, you have to have a convincing argument. You have to be able to convince the other side that you're correct. And to do this, you must use detail that is compelling. To use an argument that is compelling, based on evidence that the other side might find convincing. When analyzing if a film is good or bad, you can go, well, what elements are not great about it? How is it made? Is the acting realistic or unrealistic? Is it compelling? Can you feel the emotions on a scene? Is the script consistent? Which is something Mauler particularly has a thing about. But you have to then analyze those objective details and then look at the side and say, what does this mean to the audience? How does this impact the audience? How does it impact the greater narrative? And that is a little trickier. Let me give you an example right now. This bookshelf, this one right here, all of this, it is messy. I have a lot of books and not a ton of space. Does this mean I have objectively a bad set? Well, no. It communicates the message I want it to communicate. A casual, slightly chaotic, disorganized, well-loved bookshelf. I always hated how super organized some reviewers are with their bookshelves. Like I watched a lot of Book Talk growing up, and they always had these like color-coordinated bookshelves, and I always felt like, well, do you actually read these books? Like if you take the book out and just read it casually, are you just like disrupting the flow? Do you have to have is it more decoration than function? I mean, I could neaten up all these books if I really wanted to, but I don't really want to, so I'm not going to. I choose not to. Not out of negligence, but out of a choice. Because I read these books and I take them off the shelves a lot, and it's going to get disorganized in 5 seconds anyway, so might as well have a loose assembly of where they are. The only objective detail here is it's not organized. It is your subjective opinion if you find that cozy, familiar, distracting, annoying, irritating, whatever. That's your opinion. But the objective detail, bookshelf is messy. See how that works? Now, to expand this to a film, tons of objective details litter a shot, but it's your takeaway that makes them matter to a critic, and thus to an audience. You have to then convince the audience that your interpretation of these details is correct. It's not about participation trophies, it's about putting pressure on the critic to better convince the audience of their perspective. Saying it's in my opinion can be used as a crutch by some critics, but I like to think of it more as the idea that by saying it's your opinion, you have to convince the other side that you're right. If I disagree with you, I'll be sure to disagree with you vocally. And I have. Now, at this point, MauLer references both The Room and CinemaSins as being quote-unquote works of art that people generally accept are bad.
Participation is now enough to celebrate quality. Everybody who was in the race now gets a first place medal. It's as if they no longer want to recognize how well the goal was completed or how shockingly it was failed. Of course, this doesn't apply when talking about The Room or Birdemic. Or how about CinemaSins? It is very difficult to find anyone who declares CinemaSins is a channel of quality. However, CinemaSins is a form of art. He has transformed the original content for a different purpose. Surely whether his work is bad is purely subjective. Of course, I don't see it that way, but what I'm trying to show is that they do use objectivity as a scale when it suits them. But that fights their principle of everything coming down to an opinion, so you will only find it happening with the things they so desperately want beaten into the ground.
Well, first off, MauLer, you seriously overestimate the number of people who like CinemaSins, even in 2025. Especially 6 years ago when you made this video, I remember hearing stories about people putting CinemaSins on at bars and people like cheering it on. Like, that's anecdotal. I've heard that before. I never saw it personally, but like, come on, like people are watching it, laughing, getting along with it drunk, echoing the opinion CinemaSins had, looking for sins in media. Tons of people do that. It was very well widely done. There is no contradiction in saying that some people see that as compelling. They make an argument, and people can either be convinced or unconvinced. I'm personally unconvinced by it. I think CinemaSins is garbage, but that is a subjective perspective on the objective details provided. But since you brought it up, let's talk about The Room for a second, shall we? It's a cult classic because of how inept the film is.
I did not hit her. It's not true. It's bullshit. I did not hit her. I did not. Oh, hi, Mark.
It's a demonstration of the incredible technical skill it takes to make even a mediocre film, by showing what happens when very few of those technical skills are present in the making of a film.
What a story, Mark.
And yet, despite these shortcomings, the film is still widely regarded, widely referenced. It's more widely referenced than, say, the Academy Award-winning film Shakespeare in Love, because unlike Shakespeare in Love, people actually enjoy watching The Room. Despite both being over 20 years old, one is in the conversation while the other isn't. There's a reason why some films become so bad they're good, as opposed to others that are just so bad they're bad, because objective details that you can cite as good or bad do not always add up to the same sum. Birdemic 1 and 2, for example. The first one is, I think it's trash too, but people liked it well enough as a so bad it's good film to laugh at. The second film does much the same as the first, but it's terrible. While the first one felt sincere, the second one felt staged. Even though objectively they are very similar, they do much the same things, the scenes are kind of the same, audiences rejected the second one in favor of the first. We can argue as to why, like the lack of sincerity behind the project, just repeating the last film's moments, but this, I think, ultimately proves that a pure objective cataloging of what happens in a film isn't enough. You need to ask, subjectively, how did this film resonate with you? For example, it's my opinion that both films, Birdemic 1 and 2, are unwatchable garbage, enjoyable only by people filtering out the best bits. But that's my opinion. And I could probably convince you of this by just making a montage of all the boring driving scenes when nothing happens in the film. I won't because I don't want to waste your time, but I could.
Man, that was a good movie, an inconvenient truth.
That is it.
I'm getting myself a car that's environmentally friendly.
The problem I have is that Mauler conflates summary with review, as is the case when he shows a montage of critical errors in misrepresenting scenes in films and gameplay mechanics that he's done in the past.
I think I should be clear in saying that anyone, including myself, likely in this very series of videos, will eventually, in their lives, create bad pieces of content, and it can be assessed for a conclusion. There are plenty of ways to determine it. Let's start with getting facts wrong. That would be a big one. We open up in the 1970s with two characters that have a plan to share weaponry to communities surrounding the area with Wakandan technology because of the struggle that persists. No, it was set in 1992. What's wrong with you? As far as I'm concerned, plenty of these show an opportunity for a backstab to activate, and it comes across as the game falling asleep. Don't you know that the Jester robes are immune to backstabs, you hack? We then see the Hulk has been transported directly to Camotage. No, it was Sanctum Sanctorum. How can you call yourself a critic? Yes, these are a few moments of several in which I get things wrong. Do you know why? Because there is objective information that I failed to research correctly. I made mistakes in the art I created. My work is therefore flawed, affecting the overall objective quality. This is possible when you understand that objectivity exists in art.
These are objective errors, sure, but they're also just summation. It doesn't offer much perspective on the films or games he's talking about. It's just telling you what happens in it. And that's not enough. When you look at what Mauler counts as his personal mistakes, he counts getting a date wrong, summarizing a character standing still, and the Hulk landing in a building as his big mistakes. But that's not analysis. There's nothing really to that. If those details were changed, and if those details were different, it really wouldn't change the core arguments. He's selecting these because they're non-essential, small details that he can point to and say, look, I got things wrong too, without actually fundamentally reassessing the conclusions he makes in his various videos. Yeah, it's a good summary, maybe, but it's not compelling. Does anyone else find that compelling? Because I find it boring. If I wanted to know what happens in a movie, I'll just watch the movie. And Mauler, thankfully, is better than most at the summary game because a lot of people online just summarize episodes of shows or videos and movies and they call it a day. That's the extent of their analysis, and it's boring. It's lazy. It doesn't give you a perspective on the media. It's just a lazy recount of something that already exists, and it's like diminishing returns. You can just watch the movie yourself. When I look at media analysis on YouTube, I look for media analysis. I don't look for just, oh hey, this happened in the movie, yay. I look for an opinion. If you're going to go by shot by shot by shot, you better offer compelling information alongside the shot for shot analysis. Mauler does attempt this, and I will give credit where credit is due. He does break free from summary, typically. But his review style also incorporates summary as a major component that I think pads out his reviews with unnecessary, redundant information. It's not that his reviews are long. I have long videos. So does HBomberguy, who he criticizes here. And really, so does Quentin Reviews, who has them all beat with his length. But I think the problem is, it's not compelling. And even in regard to Mauler's errors, there's many more he's not acknowledging. User Domo3000 put together a 2-hour video, over 2 hours actually, cataloging all the errors that Mauler makes in regards to Dark Souls 2. And while I could just play the entire video to show you what he gets wrong, he really goes by bit across the entire video to catalog every individual error Mauler makes. And this video really helped with me understanding Mauler's difficulties as a critic.
But when it comes to these people, facts are frustrating because it can force a strongly held position to face scrutiny when they would prefer to simply enjoy their perspective while letting others know they are incorrect for having theirs. This approach to analysis is novel and oftentimes very entertaining, but it will leave you completely inconsistent and outright embarrassing to listen to, especially when you begin to completely contradict your own thesis without even realizing it.
There will always be people for whom an experience just isn't for them, or who are too dumb to understand how to play something, or don't realize that something they think is good is objectively bad. Some people really like Fallout 3, and they seem to be the specific type of people who think clicking a dislike button is a decent way of expressing their feelings. In other words, objectively stupid people like Fallout 3. And there is a right way to play the Souls games. You can hide behind the shield a lot, die over and over trying to memorize every encounter, or use magic from a distance to avoid having to engage with the game, or wear the heaviest armor and hope that'll save you. But the reality is, it's just more fun playing it as someone who dodges, who weaves, who parries, and who uses situational awareness to assess a situation.
But speaking of HBomberguy, the one I do find compelling, Mauler then presents HBomberguy not responding to his dumb tweet as objective proof that HBomberguy was angry at him after listening to a clear joke and completely misunderstanding what HBomberguy's point was. It's kind of weird.
You guys remember HBomberguy. He acknowledged my existence again on Twitter. It was wonderful. Last time he spoke to me it was about my DS2 series, and in relation to someone saying they couldn't be bothered to watch any more than 10 minutes, he had this to say at the end of the conversation. Have you ever eaten something bad and stopped? Or realized there were 8 more courses and stopped? Because I think people who do that might still have some relevant criticism. And in response, I said, that is an interesting analogy, and had someone watched part 1 and offered criticism for it, I am sure it would be helpful. But to eat a potato and complain that the entire meal tastes bad is simply not useful at all. He chose not to respond to me again after that exchange. You're 100% entitled to your opinion, and you noticed a bunch of genuine mistakes I made in the video, but pretending that your opinion is the only one based in facts, and people who find that approach tiresome or just scared of the truth, is a bit of an overstep. So I responded by asking why he's trying to make me look crazy by implying that I think my opinions are facts due to achieving objectivity. I don't think you're a bad person. I simply don't agree with your approach to video game criticism. It's a little immature to write as if you've achieved objectivity and I'm out to make you look crazy for it. And I'd recommend, like, chilling out. Lol.
I guess it's easy to win a fight with an opponent made of straw.
You are damn right, Harris. He pointed out a criticism of mine that was not valid as it was clearly taking a joke seriously. I responded that even if it were a joke, I provided context so that viewers would understand that and choose to ignore me or see the argumentation for how weak it was regardless. I kept getting notifications of that conversation as time went on, likely because it was featured at the end of my Last Jedi series. As a result, many had a problem with how sheepishly he responded to my criticism.
It's very oversensitive, I think, in my opinion, of Mauler to get this angry about HBomberguy's response to him.
These are the kind of videos you end up with when you have a severe lack of self-awareness.
Ignoring how Mauler spends so much time with this video complaining about tweets HBomberguy made, what I find so strange about all this is that HBomberguy incorporates objective criticism into his work. I know it was made years after Mauler's vid, but HBomberguy objectively said, James Somerton plagiarized. The difference there is that HBomberguy used this objective evidence to provide his subjective claim that Somerton was a hack and should be disregarded as a critic.
As of making this motion graphic, there are 56 video essays on his YouTube channel dated after October 2018. A minimum of 22 contains some amount of plagiarized material. He also has 2 essays exclusively to his Vimeo page. According to him, YouTube flagged them not safe for work. These have a ton of plagiarism in them too. Several videos were taken down and then re-uploaded with parts removed, like Attack on Titan and a few others. I don't know how I should account for re-uploads on this list, but we should at least include videos which were deleted and never came back, like Codebreakers, and hey, welcome back Unrequited. He took that re-upload down too at some point. I wonder why. And let me be clear, this is just the plagiarism we know of. We could have easily missed the stuff in the other videos, or there could be more deleted ones we don't even know about. That's a minimum of 26 videos that steal stuff. Like James said, there's not 3 or 4 examples, there's hours of examples. An entire channel's worth of examples. This isn't a one-off mistake, or a misunderstanding, or a citation error. This is a pattern with no sign of stopping. There's no fixing this, and there's no undoing the damage he's done, directly and indirectly, by using so many people's work without credit for money.
Any question of morality or the ethical decision one should make with internet information is inherently subjective, but because the video essay was so convincing and so compelling, it felt like the only logical conclusion to draw from HBomberguy's information.
Japan has certain laws, such as what time of night a queer-centric show can actually be aired on TV. This show was slated for an earlier time slot in the night because it's first and foremost a sports anime. In order for the quiet part to be as loud as the creator wanted, it would have to have had a much later time slot than the network wanted.
This is a common myth made up by Western fans of the show to explain why it wasn't gayer. They wanted to, but it was illegal. How convenient. But that law doesn't work that way, and even if it did, Yuri on Ice aired at 2:30 AM in the morning, the gay witching hour. They could do whatever they wanted. But now I see people continuing to spread this lie, linking Somerton's video as proof it's true. James is helping to reinforce misinformation by not checking whatever he hears on Twitter before he spreads it, which is a bit concerning. Basically, basically, I can't really watch James's videos because I care a lot about the stuff he talks about, and I can tell he's not really checked what he's saying, and that really gets to me.
This is also a huge difference in HBomberguy's style versus MauLer's. MauLer basically states in videos his general opinions prior to providing evidence, then uses the objective structure of his review to provide the thesis he states at the beginning.
You'll permit me, if you will, to go on a rant about the state of video essays and reviews on YouTube these days. Star Wars The Last Jedi was panned quite thoroughly across much of YouTube, but since it is a part of such a popular franchise, it had plenty of fans remaining, as does anything with that kind of reach. At this juncture, however, thanks to months of discussion, most points have been brought to the logical baseline, with some who apparently haven't heard a single counter-argument still trailing to join the discussion. At the end of my assessment, I said that the film was overall objectively bad in terms of filmmaking. It is of poor quality.
Or, possibly worse, MauLer starts like it's a CinemaSins video.
Oh fuck, let's get this over with. Black Panther opens with a neat animation explaining the history of Wakanda.
He does this on his EFAP live streams to an extent, concluding that he will hate something, then watching it live for seemingly the first time, and lo and behold, he hates it. HBomberguy, by contrast, will provide a shifting thesis. One that starts out with a general perspective that is adjusted as he presents more evidence to the viewer.
Okay, you know that trick video essayists use where they open on a semi-related example that sets the stage for the wider topic? It's a classic, I do it all the time. I wanted to open on a recent example of a writer winning a plagiarism lawsuit and getting their day in court. But there isn't one. This ancient case, which took place over a decade before I, and statistically you, were even born, is still the best, most recent, and almost only example. Ellison and Bova are among the few writers to ever see financial compensation for their work being stolen. This video is about James Somerton.
Now obviously HBomberguy knows what conclusion he's going to make before he starts filming.
Last time I wanted to research one thing and tripped and learned too much. This time I had the breakdown and worked backwards.
But he presents it in a way where the viewer develops a perspective alongside the argument, accepting small details before providing further context to guide the audience to his perspective. Do you know who else followed the structure? James Somerton! Because all the talented writers he ripped off knew how to write a convincing argument. MauLer, by contrast, starts by saying a film or story is objectively bad, and then looks for evidence to back it up. Neither structure is objectively bad necessarily, but I find MauLer's structure less convincing because it doesn't really win anyone over who wasn't already on board with his perspective from the start. If a viewer who hates The Last Jedi, for example, watches MauLer's 6-hour Last Jedi review, they're going to be on board from the start because he hates what they hate. But a fan of The Last Jedi is going to dismiss the review as rage bait and live comfortably never watching it. HBomberguy, though, starts with a small, simple statement that builds into something bigger. That makes his videos more engaging because it doesn't throw a partisan issue at you from the start. It invites you in, and by the time you get to the point, you're on his side. Also, he has jokes and doesn't take himself too seriously, something MauLer clearly struggles with. And a lot of that has to do with one thing. MauLer acts like his opinion is concrete, while HBomberguy acts like it's flexible. This intrinsically changes how you engage with their criticism. It's why HBomberguy gets millions of views on his videos, while I, a channel with a fraction of the subscribers MauLer has, can ratio MauLer's review of my video. It's one of the reasons why so many people ratio MauLer. Look at the Jenny Nicholson review of Joker that EFAP responded to. Look at the vast difference of people who spent 12 hours watching EFAP complain about Jenny Nicholson versus people watching Jenny Nicholson briefly give her opinion on Joker. And yeah, I know the whole stream isn't 12 hours of just complaining about Jenny Nicholson. I know that, but the optics are pretty clear. It's less important what is actually said in this case, and more how it is perceived by the audience who can engage with it. After all, if no one engages with your video, no one is going to hear you at all. Okay, real talk. For the last year, people have begged me to acknowledge MauLer's response to my video, the YouTube critics are lying to you, which I chose not to mainly because when receiving criticism, it is my opinion that I should sit down, shut up, and listen to it. I don't really like responding to criticism because I think it's The key element of it is to listen to it and assimilate it. See what works, what doesn't. Can I make better content from this feedback I've received?
That just makes you a beta cuck.
Meanwhile, MauLer responds to a tweet criticizing him, going off in this long tirade about how valuable objective criticism is and how inconsistent HBomberguy is. Well, hell, other people have pointed out that MauLer's Dark Souls 2 review, and it was a response to HBomberguy himself, is very inconsistent. It reflects a poor understanding of the mechanics that HBomberguy does understand.
There are also more Heidi Knights in general, which is great, and something I wanted. And also they're way more aggressive. Some of them get up and go for you now, and that's a really cool thing that you just don't expect if you play the original, and that's really, really fun.
This is getting ridiculous now. The Hyde Knights were removed from several spots in the original game and placed into Hyde's Tower of Flame. There wasn't a significant increase in numbers in the entire game, and again, he shows he doesn't play his own game that thoroughly.
Domo points out, however, MauLer's wrong. The Hyde Knights are actually all over the place. MauLer just ran past all of them. He missed them. He wasn't paying attention. He was being chased by other enemies and just completely bypassed them. He wasn't playing the game correctly, yet smugly declared that he knew the game better than HBomberguy.
But of course, MauLer can't stand the idea that HBomberguy could be right, so he just has to make something up to falsely present him as uninformed. As we've seen time and time again, MauLer is neither fair to Dark Souls 2 nor to HBomberguy. He falsely presents himself as smart, intellectual and competent at this game, when he clearly fails at all three of those.
This is the kind of thing that will of course happen to me down the line if I fall out of touch. But how you respond to criticism can often say more than the initial statement ever could. These are the kind of videos you end up with when you have a severe lack of self-awareness.
MauLer keeps trying to one-up and prove himself to HBomberguy, but HBomberguy seems to effortlessly prove himself the better critic. This response is objective, the same way MauLer's response is objective. But it makes it harder to buy MauLer's counter-argument when someone else can use the same tactics to illustrate how MauLer doesn't really understand Dark Souls 2 as well as he claims to. And mind you, I'm not really much of a Dark Souls player, so I can't really say who's right and who's wrong from my perspective. I have no horse in this game, but I can recognize a compelling argument when it's made to me based on gameplay mechanics, lore analysis, as well as the more flexible style of the other reviewers. Now, HBomberguy giving him feedback, you would think that would make MauLer pause and maybe reflect on his perspectives, but he just keeps doubling down on what he's saying. He doesn't stop to absorb the feedback, but rather sees feedback as something to fight. And that's something objectively that I think is really bad about the objective critic standpoint. That rather than ever say, maybe I misunderstood the text, they're objectively right, therefore they must keep fighting at it. At no point do they stop to really receive feedback unless it's from someone they personally like and trust. Feedback from sources that are different from them, or from a different perspective than they are, is seen as a threat to their style, and thus they fight back. Hell, I mentioned MauLer so briefly in my video, it barely even measured as a response, and yet MauLer and his crew and tons of other people in his general circle responded to my video, even though I didn't mention almost any of them. Which I guess is in part of my motivation with this whole video. If they're gonna talk about me anyway, I might as well criticize them right back. What are they gonna do? Respond again?
He later admitted that yes, there are mistakes in Dark Souls 2 and his video on it, but they are not flaws in overall game design, objectively. They are mistakes, but they are not flaws. Right.
But it's right here, MauLer hit something very interesting here. The conflation of mistakes and flaws. And this segment here, this right here, is the biggest reason objective criticism as an argument fails for me. Because sometimes mistakes are better than perfection. Allow me to explain this. I want to draw attention to one of my favorite mistakes in filmmaking that I think absolutely makes the scene the mistake happens in. It's in the movie It's a Wonderful Life. Now, George Bailey, he's leaving his brother's wedding. There's a whole lot of context to this, but that's not really important right now. And he talks to his uncle, who's at the time quite inebriated, and he wanders off singing to himself. Now, the scene as written, that should be it. But instead, the actor playing the uncle off camera tripped over some filming equipment left out in his way. I'm alright. Oh, sweetie. This is an error, a mistake, yet the actors play it off in character. and the scene is included in the final film. It's so seamless you think it's intentional, but it's actually a complete error, a series of errors. You just assume the drunk uncle stumbled over a trash can. You don't realize it's actually a series of mistakes because it's done so seamlessly in the narrative. And it's a mistake, but it's not a flaw because it turns a throwaway moment into a great character beat for both George and his uncle. It adds depth and richness to the film that would not be there if the film was perfect or consistent or flawless. Another example, Django Unchained. It's a mistake that Leonardo DiCaprio cut his hand on a shattered glass. It was not intended, and the actors are visibly uncomfortable as DiCaprio continues the scene without breaking character. But it's not a flaw, because it makes the scene so uncomfortable to watch. He uses the actual injury as a power move in scene, and it elevates the moment. It is a mistake, but it's not a flaw.
They are mistakes, but they are not flaws. Right.
See, mistakes are just unintentional components of a film. They're not intended, but a flaw detracts from the movie without giving any new experience. Objectively, both scenes I mentioned should be demerits by Mauler's metric. They are not intended by anyone. They're inconsistent with what happens before. They take you out of the moment in theory. They could take you out of the moment at least, but they add to the film because they feel completely organic.
Ultimately, if you subscribe to these channels, their standards get very confusing, so I say let's throw them out the window in favor of something far more consistent.
If we were to apply Mauler's objective criticism to these instances, both would be seen as flaws that indicate the film was ineptly made. This is the problem with having rigid metrics to judge every film by. Not every film can be measured by the same metric. And even sometimes a film that could otherwise be interpreted with this metric may contradict it. See, Mauler is treating this like the light and dark side, as though he paints critics that must be purely subjective or purely objective, which, no. Objective details can support subjective arguments. Mauler's problem is he conflates his objective evidence with his subjective conclusions. Like, saying the script is inconsistent, okay, but saying a script is inconsistent based on all the evidence provided, sure, that's an objective criticism, in theory. You are removing yourself from the emotional components. But, subjectively, you might be looking at the script more critically because you don't like the movie. That influences your bias. Even if you claim you're objective, that subjective perspective going to the script will influence what you say. And even if all you're saying is objective, and it's very literal, and it's very to the point and focused, the conclusions you draw from it will be based on your subjective opinions of those errors. Do you like the errors or do you not like the errors? Most likely you won't, and therefore you'll say the film is terrible or awful. And one more thing, it also doesn't help that Mauler's standards only apply to traditionally structured storytelling. I await hearing him talk about the inconsistencies and plot holes in Tetsuo the Iron Man or Derek Jarman's Blue.
In the pandemonium of image, I present you with the universal blue.
Films that don't really conform to that logical flow. As an aside, I do want to give credit where it's due. It looks like Mauler has reviewed some unusual films like The Father. But The Father is pretty normal in the hierarchy of strange films. Tell me when he reviews Mad God, for example, and then we'll start talking. And hey, they are definitely filled with plot holes. They are contrived. They are inconsistent. They are artificial. That's also the point. You know, the authorial intent is very important with this discussion. As an aside, I will give my standards right now for examining media. What I typically do very informally when examining media and giving a critical thought process to if it works or not. And it's very simple and very consistent. I ask 3 questions. Question 1. What is the intent of the creator? What are they trying to accomplish? What are they trying to show? What are they trying to tell us? Question 2. What helps the creator relay this message? If it's a comedy, do they tell good jokes? If it's a horror story, is there scares involved? If it's an action film, is the action intense? Do you feel vulnerable? Do you feel like you're breathless with the anticipation of what's going to happen next? And the third question, what impedes the author on their intent to communicate this idea? What flaws get in the way? What issues impede progress? With this metric, it's pretty easy to have a very flexible, very applicable set of standards 4 different films. By Mauler's own standards, this might be considered a form of objectivity, though probably not as objective as he'd prefer. And that's alright. It doesn't have to be his standards, because I feel like this actually works better when dealing with more experimental films, such as Tetsuo the Iron Man. But enough of me, I'm sure you're bored of that by now. Let's go back to Mauler.
So yes, objectivity and subjectivity. At this point, the concept has practically drawn a line between 2 types of critical analysis. The issue is that many content creators will blend the 2 ideas and then hide under the banner of subjectivity to avoid criticism. Rather than being happy to compare how they felt to the reality of the content, there is this stubborn assumption that the first thing you felt is now the only piece of information that's relevant to the deconstruction of the media. How you feel may remain with you, but that doesn't mean you should stop listening to other people, exploring the content with any depth, or allowing yourself to experience even more. Instead, there's this idea that you should hold on to that one narrow perspective, which is detrimental to communication, especially if it's based on false information.
Mauler, who does this? Like, who actually does this? Hell, one of your most popular punching bags, Chris Stuckman, outright talks about how his opinions shift over time.
I'm very curious to see what the legacy of these films will be over time, because as I said in my original review, and this is what I've always thought about Star Wars, we rarely ever decide in the present how people in the future are going to think about any movie. I mean, think about all of the films that critics trash when they came out, that over the years have become classics, like Fight Club, for instance, is a big one. This movie is, I'm obviously not comparing it to Fight Club, I'm just saying that, like, in 20 years, when our kids are watching this movie, I'll be very curious to hear what they think about it.
Who actually just stops at their first feelings of a film and ends it there?
Hey, when they let her out of the cage and they're heading into the city for their mission, she's like texting the Joker? Mm-hmm. Why does she have a cell phone?
Maybe she hid it in some crack.
Okay.
I really couldn't tell you.
She's had it in there for years.
Maybe she found one while they were walking around on the street. I really don't know. But yeah, she's...
Listen, you're being transferred. I don't know where you're going. It's for Mr. J. You gonna tell him I took care of you?
You're so screwed.
Red Letter Media created an assessment of Suicide Squad. This was a writing flaw they cited to assist in proving a conclusion about the film's poor quality without realizing they had missed a detail in one of the scenes. So they acknowledged the error, and despite that flaw in their assessment, their conclusion was still strong because of many other references that were accurate to the events in the film. And the conversation was once again completed after being amended, which is great. In fact, it's quite a positive experience for everybody involved. But not for these guys. To be wrong is to have your position weaken, so that is unacceptable, and therefore everyone is right. No one can be wrong, except people who use the term objective. They need to be burned at the stake.
This example right here of Red Letter Media getting a detail wrong is exactly what I'm talking about, Mauler. An objective detail being incorrect didn't impact the overall argument because it's just one part of a larger whole. In an objective analysis in science, for example, if some of the math doesn't add up, the equation can't hold, it falls apart. But in literary analysis, that doesn't really happen because literary analysis is not an objective science, it's a perceived science. It's a matter of analysis through argumentation and interpretation. The problem is Mauler fails to understand this, that subjective opinion is informed by objective details. Mauler seems to think that subjective opinion is a safety net, but it's really not. It's an argument. Though I will give Mauler this, saying, "This is my opinion" to avoid getting criticized, that is a safety net.
But to label something you found to be factual as objective is not something these guys want to do. People don't want to use it because it places a target on their back. It means that there is no safety net to fall back on, no chance to say, it's just an opinion. Let me have my opinion. You're essentially saying that your content is correct. So if it turns out to be incorrect when information is fact-checked or new information arises, you have to admit that you've made objective mistakes. Many YouTube reviews still accept it, and it's a great tool in an analytical arsenal because you can grow from understanding the difference between facts and feeling.
And that is something I don't personally like when people do that. I think if you have a strong enough argument, you should stand up by it and say, hey, here's my interpretation. Here's my argument. Saying it's just an opinion, I'm with Mauler in this one. It can be a little grating at times. Using The Last Jedi as an example, arguing the film has no inconsistencies is different than arguing the film is bad because inconsistencies exist. And I'm going to make the argument here that the film is not consistent. There are issues with the film on a script level, which I've discussed elsewhere. I don't think it's the best Star Wars film. I don't think it's the best Rian Johnson film. But to argue that consistency is the sole metric of quality, that's not really a good argument. Robert McKay, in his book Story, see, I incorporated the shelf in this case, argues character inconsistency actually enriches narrative. That character dimension can be examined through how characters behave in ways that appear contradictory to their nature when pushed by conflict. Here's an example everyone knows of Spider-Man in Spider-Man No Way Home. He's driven to a murderous rage against the Green Goblin, when in prior films he fought to save his opponents, such as the Vulture, from the destruction after their own fight. I'm not saying Mauler would regard this as a flaw. Spider-Man's arc is kind of well-defined. But someone using Mauler's structure without looking at the whole piece of the story might. They might look at two events that happen in separate movies with the same character and go, well, he didn't do this then, why is he doing this now? Removing it from the context of the arc leading up to that point. And I'm sure Mauler would say those people are being incorrect. But that's not the point. The point is that Mauler's structure inspired them to look at the film in that lens for perfect, rigid consistency. Films don't really have that. And again, I'll be fair, it's not Mauler's fault someone would do that. I'm not holding it against the guy. But I am saying this objective structure can lead to some objectively incorrect film takes. But Mauler isn't really talking just about character consistency. He's also talking about plot consistency. And, well, that's also something I want to talk about as well. Consider this. James Whale's The Bride of Frankenstein is in many ways inconsistent with his original film. The first film introduces the story with an actor coming to the stage. The second introduces it with Mary Shelley telling her husband and Lord Byron the rest of the narrative. The first film ends with Henry Frankenstein, yes, Henry, not Vic like in the book, recovering in bed peacefully with his wife attending him. The second film completely changes that, having them first discover Henry in the rubble of the wrecked windmill before being discovered by Dr. Pretorius. These are several inconsistencies among many between the two films, but most people agree Bride of Frankenstein is one of the first sequels to surpass the original in quality, because these inconsistencies, though they exist, don't really matter, at least not to the audience. But what about internal inconsistencies in the plot? Well, again, they are two major questions to ask. Are these inconsistencies really inconsistencies, or did you not just get it? And do these inconsistencies impact your experience with the media or the authorial intent of the media? One of those is an objective question. The other is subjective.
There is this rising obsession with the idea that logic is a faulty metric for both character assessments in storytelling and when assessing a critic and their inconsistencies. This all makes sense because humans are inherently emotional and they're not logical whatsoever.
You know what human beings are not? Logical. People are impulsive. They make choices based on emotion. Not everyone thinks exactly the same. So if everyone acted totally logically all the time, only making the most logical decision in any situation, no one would be acting human.
The issue here is the word logical is being used in two different ways at the same time. If a character behaves illogically because of a previously established character trait, then the progression is logical in terms of writing. What happened made sense with who they are. In this case, Patrick is referring to the film A Quiet Place, the story of a world in which you make a single sound and it can get you killed in a moment's notice. Patrick makes the argument that we should not expect the characters to behave logically because they are human. However, the reason that the entire video is often referenced as a straw man is because the complaint is not that they behave illogically, it's that their character writing is illogical. The characters are shown to take care with sound dampening throughout the film, making very creative decisions to account for this dire situation that shows intelligence and care, yet they blatantly ignore several options provided to them by the environment that are proven by the film to be far more beneficial to their goals. These logical contradictions in their characters are made to generate drama in the storyline, which is inherently incompetent writing and very lazy.
I wonder if Mauler even totally understands what inconsistencies are. Like, yeah, the characters could have just lived next to a waterfall their whole lives, but did you really think that through all the way? Like, how do you expect them to create an environment they can control next to a waterfall? Have you ever lived near water? You ever get your basement flooded because it rained too hard and the water overflowed? The argument that the fact the characters, who are shown to be meticulously in control of their environment, should just move next to an area to mask their sounds, but could be very hard to control, that's not logical. It's ridiculous. Especially because none of this has any meaningful impact on the film's true core. The family, the relationships, the bonds. The plot could have happened next to a waterfall, could have happened next to a farm, but it's very clear the farm and that entire grass area has fewer environmental variables that could damage and hamper the family's efforts. After all, what's more dangerous? Having to meticulously plan out a quieter environment, or living next to an environment that could mask your sounds, but also drown you, or potentially force you out of that habitat. You see, the problem is they don't think of these details. Think, oh, well, waterfall masks sound, therefore better than open field. But, like, did you really think of how the environment... I don't think these people ever lived next to a river, I think, is my best bet. Stuff like this is what I like to refer to as giving too much of a fuck about crap no one cares about. By doing this, you lose track of the stuff that matters in a story. Character, emotion, themes, ideas, the feeling, the adrenaline rush. That's not to say that it has no impact, but you gotta ask yourself, does it matter no one was in the room with Kane when he said his final words in Citizen Kane? It's a huge plot hole, one of the most famous plot holes, but it also doesn't factor into Kane's past, the real story and meat of the film. It's just an event that happens that gets you to the flashbacks, to the recollection. The mystery of what Kane meant by Rosebud is just an element that gets the plot moving. But what MauLer would call that lazy writing, or something. You know, that's fair. And it is a plot hole, but does it matter? Film fans love giving a damn about small details, but it gets annoying when someone pretends these small details supersede the big details of a story. And yeah, a bunch of small cracks can make a whole film fall apart. I get that. That makes sense to me. I believe that. But we ignore the elements of film that matter in favor of details that really you don't notice unless you're really looking for them. Is that terrible writing, or is it flawed writing? I maybe would say flawed. But would I say a whole film is bad because of it? I don't think so.
Hopefully I can explain this with a reverse example. Do you believe that Thanos' plan in Infinity War makes sense? Well, that's irrelevant compared to what comes first in consistent character writing, which is... do you believe that Thanos believes his plan makes sense? The film makes efforts to show his history and explore his values to explain his actions as a logical progression, despite the plan being inherently illogical when considering the realistic effect of his snap versus what his intentions are. That is logically consistent writing for an emotionally irrational or illogical character, and that is the nuance that you will rarely find in assessments nowadays, because everything has to be 10 minutes long or it's wrong.
This bit right here about Thanos, though, I do agree with MauLer in this one. It kind of goes into the idea that what sounds right versus what is right based on character behavior. MauLer's approach can work, as is the case with this Thanos moment, but I just don't think it works elsewhere.
So let's try another example. Star Wars The Last Jedi has no inconsistencies in either its characters or its plot, in my opinion. This opinion is inherently objective, and saying "in my opinion" at the end would be redundant because of course it's your opinion, but that doesn't make it subjective. The opinion lacks any emotive language, it is a statement of fact. To be inconsistent is qualifiable outside of emotion. That means the statement the person made lacked experience or information. It is impossible to come to the conclusion that there are no inconsistencies unless you are ignoring the meaning of words in the English language. It is simple. You present the objective criteria, then you satisfy the objective criteria and reach a conclusion. Your emotional experience didn't enter into the equation whatsoever. This should highlight the issue of "in my opinion" being used arbitrarily to stave off criticism when criteria isn't clear, or when it's downright contradictive. It's as if they believe an opinion can never be refuted. Aside from that issue, when you make these statements and you don't bother to back them up with any evidence or argumentation, instead opting for the safety net,
in my subjective opinion,
you are not only creating content with the amount of substance that is on par with a thumbs up or down for each subject, you have also admitted that you have so little faith in your own perspective that you had to put a preemptive scrutiny shield in front of it.
MauLer saying a critic is a coward for saying "in my opinion." Okay. I don't really disagree with that. I think it is a little cowardly to rely on the opinion card to get away from getting feedback for your perspective. But That said, I also think that you saying your criticism is objective is also cowardly. And with all of the things Mauler is saying, it's very important to remember at the beginning of this, all of this started with him saying that The Last Jedi is a bad film.
This may shock you, but Star Wars The Last Jedi is objectively bad content. It is provable. This is factual. You may enjoy the film, and even love the film, that's absolutely fine, but it is a poorly written film that stands as an objective insult to intelligence.
It's not simply that it's inconsistent, but that inconsistency leads to it being a bad film. As was the case with HBomberguy, it is an objective observation leading to a subjective conclusion. Good or bad is not the same as the metric of consistency that Mauler has set up. Good is good, bad is bad. Those are opinions. Regardless of how much he glosses over it, these are still opinions, and he's still giving a thumbs up and thumbs down with a lot more work to get to the same answer those reviewers in 10 minutes got to. Despite all of his protests, despite all of his talking, he always comes back to the same thing that the people he's criticizing also come back to. Is it good or is it bad?
This active blurring of facts and feelings gets very confusing for many viewers who actually listen to these people's scripts, their videos, making us question whether they actually understand what the word objective means.
See, again, I firmly believe that objective details are important in media analysis, but they are elements that support your stance. Because if you have to argue, my opinion is objective, you immediately sound like a pompous jackass. You know? I don't care if you have all the evidence in the world to prove it. I'm not going to listen to you because you sound like an asshole. But if you say, my argument is based on details and I cite evidence for my claim, I think that sounds more reasonable. It's the same basic statement. You're saying the same core thing, but it's how you present your arguments that affects how people perceive it. And I'm pretty sure Mauler realizes this because he seems acutely aware of how phrasing can impact the perception of a critic in a video essay, as is the case right here.
A vague label of opinion is being slapped on every element of a video essay, as if the word means that everything you said, whether feeling or fact, was subjective, and thus cannot be disputed. Conversely, if a video presents strong arguments on a subject, many will wave it off as it's just an opinion, as if the word means there was nothing objective about the content whatsoever. That is not how it works. An opinion can apply to the sharing of a view constructed of feelings, of thoughts, or of objective information. It depends on what is said. It is the difference between objective and subjective. This applies to every facet of communication, including discussion on art. Though that doesn't mean you should then spam it in every sentence of your essay like many have started doing as an excuse for poor research.
My problem with Mauler isn't he made fun of a video I made. That's beside the point. A ton of people do that. He sells his subjective opinions, rooted in evidence, cited as if it's the absolute truth, then gets pissy at other critics who do the exact same thing he does for not being objective enough. Even if, in some cases, they're even more objective than he is. See, Mauler, as much as he hates to admit it, is not much different from HBomberguy or Patrick Willems in terms of how they examine media. Mauler just turns the deep dive research phases HBomberguy and Willems do before writing their scripts and adds it to the runtime of his videos to prove he did his homework to the audience, to make it more compelling, rather than cite the specific evidence as relevant in specific instances of his argument. And by doing so, he includes a ton of details that the audience, frankly, does not need to see for him to prove his point. A review of Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Badness can be an hour long, it could be 2 hours long. Why does it need to be over 5 hours long? You basically just replay the whole film in front of us and then give us the summary details after the fact. Disseminate what's important for us, the audience. Communicate clearly and concisely what you have to say. There are many points in his Doctor Strange review, for example, that Mauler probably could have trimmed for time. Not that it's necessarily unfunny or bad, but you have to ask yourself, do you really need this segment right here? Is this really necessary?
Wait, why would it go that way intuitively, though? Like, that doesn't seem to be as expected a change compared to Defender Strange having a different power set, or Wanda having had kids in other universes. Switching red and green sounds like the kind of idea you have when you have no ideas.
It is not a live stream, it's an edited review. Does all of this really add to your point? You might say yes, I say no. I say it distracts from your point. I say, make a long video. That's great. But fill it with detail that's directly relevant at the instances it is relevant to the audience. And then you're probably saying, well, if it's so easy to do it yourself. I did. In fact, I did it last week before making this video. I responded to Jester Bell's Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy response video. And I went through the video, take notes, analyzing it, I scripted as I went, and then what I did was, I did something really remarkable. I cut the notes that weren't relevant or repetitive. Any redundancies I cut out. I didn't need it, because I made my point already. So I had to rewrite. I had to do all this stuff off screen, so I could present a meaningful, concise video to you. And guess what? It's still really long. You can make a long video that's more concise. You don't need to recap the whole video beforehand and then give your analysis after the fact. But I also provided objective facts to support my subjective perspectives. But here's Mauler's issue. He has to insist every component of his review is objective. He has to repeat over and over and over again that his arguments about The Last Jedi is objective. Further, he does something that doesn't happen in science. Theories are meant to be tested. When tested, it can do one of two things. You can either prove the theory is wrong or prove it's incomplete. Or you prove the theory is right, but that's a third option that is obvious. People argued for years, for example, that atoms were the smallest particles of matter, until we tested that theory and found that atoms themselves were made up of even smaller particles, and then even smaller particles. The theory of atoms wasn't wrong, it was just incomplete. While Mauler admits he might make errors, there is the implication in his words that his arguments will hold regardless, because he applied the right method. And maybe they will. In some cases, they definitely will, and definitely have. I think that all movies have flaws and inconsistencies, no matter how well written it is. But the question is, when do these inconsistencies matter to authorial intent and audience entertainment? That answer will vary from person to person, but it will be based on objective details that composite subjective arguments and subjective perspectives. Mauler comes across in this video as someone who needs to fight people who disagree with him, who don't take him seriously, who don't take his perspectives seriously, to prop up his own arguments. And I get that to an extent, but what if he didn't target everyone who disagreed with him for sharing their own opinions on the internet, especially smaller creators than him? What if he just presented his argument and left it at that? What if he didn't confront everyone about disagreeing with him and make multiple videos in response to everyone arguing against him? What if he just let his videos stand? Disagree when necessary, but not every critic ever. But again, all these objective arguments break down when you stop talking about Star Wars and start talking about tough media, like Derek Jarman. Even The Shining, a film that deliberately incorporates inconsistency in order to make the audience feel consistently uncomfortable. You can't do the same thing you do with Last Jedi to The Shining. It's just not the way you should analyze that film, because authorial intent is to make the film uncomfortable to the viewer. The same metric does not apply to every film. And here's the wild part. Mauler actually knows all this. While doing research for this video, I found Jack Saint's original response to Mauler, which Mauler then EFAP'd, and then Jack Saint and Patricia Taxon responded back to. As it turns out, Mauler had a private conversation with Patricia Taxon where they discussed this objective reasoning, before of course Mauler just EFAPing them publicly anyway, just to humiliate them. But what I found very interesting is that according to Patricia Taxon, in this conversation, Mauler admits that his objective lens doesn't always work on other films.
We had a little text chat. It was very civil as promised. We didn't really get anywhere. I basically learned that Mauler is really fundamental about his scale for critiquing movies. Like, he recognizes that his scale was invented by humans, but it's like the definition for a planet. It's immutable except for like societal change in like the definitions of words. So yeah, I tried to tell him in the chat we had, like, his critique is mostly consistent.
Mauler's main points of criticism is like logical inconsistency, and it's really not difficult to find films that have logical inconsistencies that don't bother you that much. Like, think about most comedies or like a lot of kids movies that will have these like weird logical I think
we talked about that too. Like he said that it is possible for like a comedy to subvert a logical rule, like for comedic effect. Like he said, like it would be very silly to judge Spaceballs objectively.
Right.
So, but that's he's just admitted that like there are some films that are not equipped to be judged with this scale. Therefore,
Mauler is aware what he's saying is not true. This whole time, every film could be labeled by the same objective standard, he knows it doesn't apply to certain films. And genuinely, I am skipping over a lot of Mauler's video because frankly, I found it more boring than not. But listen, I don't care if you don't like Quentin reviews. You just sound angry someone didn't praise you, and it comes across as very immature. Very insecure, I might add. Hell, again, I don't disagree with you on some of these points. I've left out a lot because in some cases, I don't disagree. I think you're right about a few things. But the problem isn't what you're saying, it's how you're saying it. You sound so full of yourself, it makes me want to dismiss everything you say. You sound so overconfident, so arrogant, and that's a big problem. Because again, the big issue is presentation. How you present your ideas makes you more compelling to an audience. It doesn't matter if you're objective or not. Mauler has to insist his opinion matters. And look, if you have to insist that you're the best at something and that your perspective matters, maybe you're trying too hard. Maybe it doesn't matter all that much. If you have to yell at someone to tell them that you're right, maybe you're not right. Let's take a step back with me. I make long videos. That's not a mistake. That's not a secret. Mauler did criticize my review. He took a lot of time to do it, but hey, feedback is useful. A lot of what he said was helpful. If you look at my videos with that one and then next couple after that, you can see an immediate change in style and structure to the videos. I took the criticism seriously. I might have dismissed it on social media, but I took the parts that I thought were useful seriously. I've met with Celtic Phoenix, another channel that had a very similar reviews that Mauler did, and discussed the feedback there, and discussed how I could improve and how I have improved since then. I take criticism that is useful very seriously. Unfortunately, a lot of what Mauler said was obnoxious. I just didn't take most of it seriously because most of it was nonsense. But the parts that were useful, I incorporated. I didn't have to respond to it because there was nothing to respond to outside of adjusting based on feedback. The best response you can give to criticism is better work. I believe I've done that. Will they like it? I don't really care. But I think it's better, and that's what matters to me. But there is something interesting here. By and large, my video was well liked. At the time of this writing, my YouTube Critics Are Lying to You video has an 88.9% like to dislike ratio. The video has over 22,708 likes to 2,830 dislikes. By comparison, Mauler's long stream only has 3.8 thousand likes. Dislikes are hidden, and most like to dislike ratio calculators are inaccurate, so I won't be using that data here. Still, that's a fraction of what my original video saw. And that's not to say my video was particularly great either. I think it's a deeply flawed work in hindsight. But that does mean my video reached more people who engaged positively with it. At least more than Mauler did. Hell, 5.3 thousand people subscribed to my channel after watching it, which means more people saw my video and subscribed to me than people liked Mauler's original stream response, which was then re-uploaded as a video to similar effects. Now, in order to avoid sounding too subjective, I'll just leave the numbers standing without offering my perspectives on them. Just take them as you will. Also, I'd like to point out one other objective fact. One of the reasons a video is pushed harder in the algorithm is watch time. The more of a video you watch, the harder it is pushed in the algorithm. Which is strange, because you'd think Mauler's 7-hour vid, or even his hour-long highlight vid, would be pushed harder in the timeline than my 48-minute original. Now, I'm not saying that the average viewer watched more than mine significantly shorter video than Mauler's, but I'm also not saying that's not the case. Now, of course, inconsistencies can happen in a video essay. I mean, listen, I'm pretty good at hiding any inconsistencies, and avoid them myself. I mean, you probably won't find a single inconsistency in this video. I am quite good at hiding it, one could say.
These are the kind of videos you end up with when you have a severe lack of self-awareness.
I originally filmed a conclusion that would branch off into a bigger discussion. You know, I would go into other people inspired by Mauler and go into a whole thing about the influence he had, but I found very quickly that would be very boring to watch for you. It would involve watching Rags or Literature Devil, which is boring. I've done it before, it's not fun. But honestly, it would be mostly looking at CinemaSins tier responses and trying to sort through what they were saying. And I find it so strange how Mauler criticized CinemaSins before when his reviews are so often the same level of intellectual critique that CinemaSins employs. Hell, they even do the same thing. Run through a movie chronologically, bit by bit by bit, pointing out any superficial criticism along the way. I mean, I could just do it real quickly. I mean, I can re-edit Mauler's Black Panther video into a simple CinemaSins parody, but that's a trite joke, and honestly, we're too far along in this video to make trite jokes anymore. Let's get right down to the point, the concluding thoughts. You know, looking at Mauler's video about this whole topic, I can see why he spends so much time criticizing Patrick Willems' plot hole vid. I mean, it is a very commonly criticized vid, but I think many of Mauler's criticisms in film can be countered by the level of observation Willems employs. Not because it's a particularly great video, but because it runs counter to it. It argues that inconsistency is less important than how a movie makes you feel. Look, listen, Mauler always argues that you have to watch every second of a video before responding. And, you know, no, I don't want to do that. Because the truth is, most people don't even care what Mauler has to say. I even think his audience doesn't even care what he has to say. I went through some of his streams, and I looked at the level of engagement in the video, like likes and comments and all that, and there's actually a lot less than I would expect. Even his more recent streams with EFAP have gotten some pretty low viewership numbers, all things considered. I could go over all of Mauler's individual critiques over film, but, you know, look how he interacts with the medium and all that, but I don't really think I need to. Because I get him already. He makes sense to me, and I find him boring. I find him so uninteresting. And the thing that stinks about Mauler, in my opinion, is that he's stagnant. He hasn't really changed since that video came out that we're looking at right now. He's the same critic. He surrounded himself by people who embrace his style of reviewing. They tell him that he's great, and they pump him up and all that. And because of that, he's not around people who are really critical of him. Like, yeah, he's around people who disagree with him, but not fundamentally critical of his style of reviewing. He hasn't changed since that Patricia Taxon video. He has the same approach to media. And he takes real criticism, like with HBomberguy, trying to politely explain to him why he disagrees with Mauler's methods. He takes it like an act of war. Like, you know who it reminds me of? Lily Orchard. Yeah, both Mauler and Lily Orchard have not changed since 2019. They first became famous over an overly long review of a particular piece of medium that was controversial at the time, and garnered an audience of loyal devotees who never forced them to grow. While they faced criticism, they treated their critics like the enemy. They were never really engaging with them.
It's kind of clear that, like, Ant has never played a Pokemon game in his life. I mean, his watch stream had two other people basically making all of his complaints for him.
At this juncture, however, thanks to months of discussion, most points have been brought to the logical baseline, with some who apparently haven't heard a single counter-argument still trailing to join the discussion.
That's what it always does. He usually needs, like, if he doesn't have someone else to say things for him, he tends to waffle off on weird tangents that mean nothing and go nowhere.
His first video was very confusing in structure, conflating his feelings with facts while presenting that an entire genre is fundamentally broken.
Somebody actually I think like one group of people actually pointed out, like, in his video of like how YouTube critics are lying to you, in that when talking about me, he goes on for like 5 minutes saying, check out this other video or this live stream about Lily. and says nothing tangible.
They are fully aware of the difference between objectivity and subjectivity, and they know when content is poorly made. It simply doesn't apply when it's their sacred cow. Thus, they end up taking criticism as a personal insult, but good lord, that is not the case.
But now, because bad trans woman Nino said the same things everyone's been saying for years, now suddenly it needs its honor defended? What a fucking bunch, what a load. Here's hoping Ant gets plowed on the highway by a truck.
Mauler will give him this. He'll debate his opponents, but it's like on his terms. It's like, also, faint praise. I don't think Mauler has ever DMCA struck down criticisms of him, though. I don't think anyway. We'll find out.
People tried to bring that up when I fucking, when I DMCA'd those fucking reaction streams, but well, first of all, there's a difference between showing an image for 2 seconds and watching a video in its entirety. And second of all, I mostly keep doing that just to be annoying, really.
Just being a little pest.
Yeah, just being a pest. Poisoning them in the algorithm. That's the thing, when you get DMCA claimed, you get poisoned in the fucking algorithm. That nutjob's got, more videos up reacting to me. They aren't getting anywhere near the attention. Look, if these people were, sitting beside me in real life, I'd be fucking dunking their head in a goddamn toilet.
That's not really engaging with criticism fairly. If you really want to engage with criticism fairly, you don't respond to individual works of criticism. You just take it, say thank you, and you grow. Or you don't. And it's that simple. Mauler, I feel, hasn't grown. And I think that's what depresses me about this topic so much. He hasn't changed. And he won't change. This video won't change him. If HBomberguy can't change him, I have no chance of it either. And I'm not going to bother trying to. Everyone around him has improved dramatically. Look at Chris Stuckman. Again, someone that Mauler repeatedly attacked and criticized. He's made a movie with Mike Flanagan producing it. Mike Flanagan, the same guy who did Dr. Sleep and The Haunting of Hill House. Movies that are really great that I don't think Mauler's ever even talked about on his channel. I mean, maybe he has. I haven't looked at every 350 episodes of EFAP, but whatever. You know, look at HBomberguy. Look at Jack Saint. Look at Patrick Willems. All of them have improved and changed and grown in the last 6 years. All of their styles have been perfected and evolved thanks to engaging with feedback, thanks to their own process of growth. And I think it's really sad to me that he hasn't grown at all. He's the same person he was all those years ago. On stream a few weeks ago, I responded to one of Rags' videos, one of EFAP's most prominent members, and the biggest comment I got on stream was, wow, Rags is saying the exact same things he used to say 6 years ago. He hasn't changed. None of them have changed. None of them have grown. They're still like it. You would think after watching so many movies and having so much critical analysis under their belts, they might grow, but they haven't. And it's really depressing to watch. I find it more sad. Mauler sees criticism as an attack. I'm sure he's going to respond to this video too, but as I've been alluding to all this time, I'm not particularly worried about that. Because A, he's already criticized me, so, you know, I know what to expect. Big deal. But also, everything he's criticized has gotten a boost thanks to Mauler. Jenny Nicholson, with her Joker review, got a massive influx of positive viewers because they thought it was ridiculous Mauler made a 11-hour, 12-hour stream about her. And yeah, I know the whole stream wasn't about the Jenny Nicholson review, but the optics were pretty clear, and no one actually finished the stream, you know? So, no one really cared. It's just very depressing to me because this guy used to be a very promising reviewer. As much as I criticize the guy, there were many points, as I alluded to in this video that I watched, in the various things I saw of him, where I'm like, yeah, that's a decent argument. That's a decent point. Mauler really could have been a really great reviewer. He could have evolved into someone on par with HBomberguy had he just not been in his own way. But the trends are changing. Guys like HBomberguy, Patrick Willems, everyone, they're all improving, and they're all gaining momentum. But not Mauler. Mauler is projected to lose subscribers on both his MauLer channel, you know, the Every Frame of Pause main channel, and on his main Mauler account. Hell, on his main Mauler account, he's only made 5 videos in the last 2 years. He's made an EFAP every week, but that's what he's become known for. He's become the guy who makes fun of people online. He's no longer a film critic. He's no longer a media critic. He gets views to make fun of the big blockbusters, sure, but you don't see the risks he took with, say, watching The Father. I find that the saddest thing, because The Father review that he did is actually decent. It's not a bad review. It's of his same style, it's in that same method, but it's actually a decent review that reflects decent critical instincts. But, and there's the big but, he will never go back to that because it was one of his weakest performing videos. He chases the trends. That's why, of the last 5 videos he did, 2 are on Marvel, 1's on Star Wars, and the other's on Fallout. His community, especially on Reddit, is full of people who they post videos from other users saying, "Ooh, I can't wait for EFAP to cover this one and make fun of them." And there's fewer and fewer people on all those Reddit threads because the audience is shrinking. People grow out of it. They want something deeper. They want something different. And there are other people on the platform willing and able to provide something more substantial. It's very unfortunate because you can see the potential. You can see elements of it that could have spurned on to something better in these old videos. But it's not going to happen because he won't let it happen. The whole experience of this has left me feeling more sad for Mauler than anything. Even if he responds and makes fun of me, I still feel a degree of pity for him. He's a victim of his own success, at least his own early success. He became popular enough to wall himself off from further feedback that could have helped him grow. And he didn't know how to take it. He didn't know how to grow from it. He saw the entire critical landscape on YouTube as his enemy, and thus became an enemy to the rest of YouTube's critical sphere. And as the enemy, he helped them grow. He helped them get better. And all of them got better, except for Mauler. He remained stagnant. I don't think he realizes that his best days are behind him. He's peaked as a creator on this platform. And I don't think he can ever recover. Nope, I don't think so. It's unfortunate, but there's a lesson to learn from that. Never isolate yourself from feedback. Never make the rest of a community your enemy. Always embrace and grow. Learn from the mistakes and successes of those around you. Don't make everyone your enemy, but remember they're your competition. And competition can always help bolster your own success by learning and picking, seeing, oh, what did they do well? What did I do well? What did I do not so well? What did they do not so well? And grow from that. Develop, evolve. But if you don't evolve, then there's only one fate for you. There is only one fate for those who don't evolve.